El cuchillo corta en dos direcciones. El cuchillo corta en dos direcciones. Arterio Lopez. Okay, everyone is saying something about Floyd Wallace Jr. Number one, he's entitled to a good attorney under Brazilian law. Number two, since he does not speak Portuguese, he is entitled to a good interpreter under Portuguese law. And he has the right of refusal of counsel and interpreter. So the government, the state, just cannot assign an interpreter to him and say, this is your interpreter, this is all you get. As in U.S. law, the interpreter must be neutral and must be proven to be neutral. So the attorney of Floyd Wallace Jr. can establish if the interpreter is neutral. He's simply interpreting, not adding, not subtracting, not in favor of the state, has no prejudice, no prejudices, is not related to any of the potential victims or the supposed victims. So the attorney is going to vet the translator. But what's complicated here is that the translator is vetting the attorney also. But the translator also is going to be looking at the prosecutor and at the judge, because remember, the translator is independent. So he can or she can make claims against the prosecutor, which is the state, claims against the judge, which is the state, claims against the defendant's attorney, and the interpreter is also going to be able to judge the mental fitness of the defendant. So what you got is just, you got a real mess. That's why you got to know before you go. Now there's another element to this. Homeland Security is involved in all of this because, as Austin Hollerman said, Floyd Wallace Jr. had many phones. That does not mean that the Brazilians tracked everything that was going on those phones. That's why they referred to Homeland Security. And Homeland Security out of the United States tracks those phones. Like, for example, I'm in Mexico. So Homeland Security, which is in San Antonio, is aware of my digital communications. That's just the way it is. That's just the way it is. Now, they're aware of practically everyone's digital communications throughout the world. Everyone's. Because everyone has a digital footprint. And of course, it's a funnel system. They're going to funnel it out. They're going to funnel it down. And I'm not saying that they're specifically looking at me or you or anyone else, because it's a funnel system. You know, frequent border crossings, going to certain locations, certain trees of association. You watched a Floyd Wallace video. You commented on a Floyd Wallace video. You searched for Floyd Wallace. You watched Austin Hollerman. You watched Sunshine Shoulders in Brazil, who commented on Floyd Wallace Jr. All of those connections are processed. So everyone that's commented on this and everyone who's concerned about this, they are all being ran through that database to determine our association to Floyd Wallace Jr. Now, there's some speculation out there as to whether or not my reputation is besmirched because A, I have a passport, and B, I look like Floyd Wallace Jr.'s brother, older brother. You guys say that Floyd Wallace Jr. is wacky. Well, you know what? Floyd Wallace Jr. and I look exactly alike. And I'm sure that we have the same mental proclivities. I'm not going to in any way separate myself from him. But we can look alike. We can sound alike. But it must be proven that our behaviors are the same. I'm going to say it again. We can look alike. We can sound alike. We can even be twin brothers. But it has to be proven that our behavior is the same. At this point in life, I have had no such behaviors as Floyd Wallace is alleged to have committed. So, this Floyd Wallace Jr.'s arrest has nothing to do with passport bros. It has nothing to do with everybody is Floyd Wallace Jr. in the eyes of such and so forth. Imagine, if you will, you're the president of the United States, current sitting president, and you were in the presence of Jeffrey Epstein. Now, Jeffrey Epstein does not look like me, and he does not look like Floyd Wallace Jr. But the president of the United States is tainted because he was in the presence of Jeffrey Epstein. Someone in the English royal family has gotten defrocked from the family. I think it's Prince Andrew, because he was in the presence of Epstein, and there are allegations that he conducted himself in an Epsteinian type of way. The lawyer Alan Dershowitz, who defended Epstein, is also tainted by Epstein. So the whole idea, and Bill Clinton just put out a statement today talking about open up the Epstein files. I know that I'm in there. I know that I'm tainted, but I have nothing to hide. Okay, so I don't have to tell you that those gentlemen who I just mentioned do not look like Floyd Wallace Jr., and they do not look like me. But these people are actually tainted because they were in the presence of Epstein. Okay? Well, this is how you free yourself from all of this. Rather than saying, because I look a certain way, the actions of someone who looks like me is going to taint me, even though I don't know that person. Rather than making that argument, go way back. Sometime around 1992, I went into the theater and I watched a movie called The Crying Game. And I took a woman to that movie. And I remember walking out of the movie totally conflicted and confused. And the woman didn't say it, but she could see it. She could see the conflict and the confusion. And so during the same time, I go to the club and I'm with the fellas. And this is what happened with The Crying Game. The Crying Game started out as a movie that it was just a kind of like a low budget movie. Nobody really, it didn't get big billing. But by word of mouth, The Crying Game exploded and everyone went to see it. But the thing of it is, and this is the thing about The Crying Game, is that everybody would tell you, hey man, go see The Crying Game. Then when you ask them, what's the plot? Everybody said, that I cannot tell you. Yeah, go see the plot, but that I cannot tell you. Now, why couldn't we tell each other the plot? Because those of us who were at the club, who had all saw the Crying Game, we had some emotional baggage to deal with. And I'm not going to tell you what we had to deal with. You watch The Crying Game for yourself. Watch The Crying Game for yourself. Watch it with an open mind. Just watch the movie. Watch The Crying Game. Listen to the song. Watch the movie. Watch the movie for yourself. And then realize that that's what passport bros, dating advice, that's what all of this is about. It's what all of this is about. It's about a man's ability to make a decision for himself or to have a decision made for him. If you're watching Sunshine Shoulders, you're watching Austin Harleman, you're watching who's that guy that goes to Brazil, and the bald-headed guy from California, that the bald-headed guy, I don't know who his name is, I can't remember, but you're watching all of these guys and you're actually taking tips from these guys. And you're like me in the club in 1982. You're sitting there because you don't have any independent thinking capacity, and you're listening to what other guys have to say about your relationships and about your person. You're listening to other people. You can't make an independent decision because you haven't grown up that much. And I'll admit, 1982, I hadn't grown up that much. And I will admit, 3 years ago, I hadn't grown up that much. Because it takes experience to be a man. It takes experience for an Austin Harleman to finally be with one woman and say, this is the woman that I like, this is the woman that I'm with, and I will sow other seeds to make my money rather than having a long, continuous parade of garotas de programa that I'm paying to be on these videos and having associative relationships with them and going through the perils of all of these relationships. It's taking him some time to realize that the people on the other side of that camera, and I'm not talking about trolls, I'm talking about fans, it's taking him some time to realize that his most ardent fans, they don't care how many landmines he steps across. They don't care how many landmines he steps across. They don't care how many limbs he loses, as long as he fulfills their fantasies. So the best way to make sure you are in control of your life is to know before you go. You need to speak Tagalog for yourself. You need to speak Chinese for yourself. You need to speak Thai for yourself. You need to speak Spanish for yourself, Portuguese for yourself, English for yourself. I know a lot of Mexican guys that go up to the United States. They run up to the United States. And they get into relationships, see, because the knife cuts both ways. They get into relationships that they never would get into in Mexico. Never. And I'm giving you a perfect example.
Okay, so I promised the rest of the story. And you see a man to the left, a woman, and then below is a child that looks like the woman. And this is from a real story and a real time event. There's a guy named Arterio Lopez. And Arterio, he did not speak good He did not speak good English. Great Spanish, but he had no English. The woman that Arterio was involved with, they lived together. She had a little girl. In addition to that, she did not speak any Spanish. Or, maybe she spoke like, como te llamas, tú quieres comer, maybe she spoke like that. But that was about it. Now, I'm going to tell this story from Arturio's perspective. That doesn't mean that this is true. And before I started telling this story, I checked the public record to find out if there was an available digital record, and I can't find one. And it's the story is how it is. It's just that at that particular time in the 90s and in the 80s, basically the 90s, they didn't have the same digital storage capacity that we have now. And so hard records exist where this occurred, but there's no digital record. Okay, so Arturio was a hard-working guy. I don't know if he was a landscaper or, I forgot his job, but he was from Mexico. And he had gone up to the north part of Texas where, the Petrolias, they really don't mess with you up there, particularly in the 80s, 90s, and the early 2000s, because you were up there working in agriculture or working at a place like Tyson's Chicken or something like that. And as Mexicans were saying, you were doing the jobs that Americans didn't want to do. So people were happy to have people working their fields at a reasonable rate. And so that's what Arturio was doing. Well, Arturio could not speak English, but his English started to get a little bit better. He started to kind of understand the landscape around him. And so what happened one day, the woman comes in and she says, "Hey, Arturio, you're going to have to give me more money." And they were splitting the bills, and they were living in an apartment, I suppose. And she said, "Arturio, you're going to have to give me more money," and she named the dollar amount. And when she named that dollar amount, that was more money than Arturio was making. So Arturio honestly said, "Look, I can continue to pay half the bills or whatever, and maybe she had lost her job. I don't know." He said, "Well, I can continue to pay half the bills, but, I can't just give you everything and pay the bills. And so she got upset about it. And she accused Arturo of having another woman. And Arturo was like, look, I don't have another woman. It's just that I don't have that money. I don't make that much money. And she told Arturo, you better find some way to get the money. Well, Arturo somehow moved out. He moved out because he couldn't afford to live there anymore. And he moved in with some other Mexican guys, and maybe they were about like 5, 6, 7, 8 guys, in a house, and it was affordable. So one day Arturo is sitting there, and she comes knocking on the door and says, Arturo, I need the money. And Arturo was like, I don't live with you. I really don't have any involvement with you. I still really love you, and I would like to work things out, but you know, I can't afford it. Well, it's speculated that this woman got involved in what is that stuff called? Methamphetamine. It's speculated that she was a meth monster. And it's speculated that's what she needed the money for. So what she did was is she went over to the sheriff. She went over to the sheriff and she told all of them folks over there that Arturo was having a pedophilic relationship with the little girl, her little girl, which was not Arturo's child. Well, Arturo couldn't speak English. The little girl couldn't speak Spanish. The woman couldn't speak. The woman couldn't speak Spanish. And Arturo could not get a reasonable attorney. And the translator for Arturo, with all due respect for the profession, he was not Mexican. He was a local guy, and he had really, really good English, but he did not have Spanish as spoken in Mexico, particularly for a speaker that was isolated like Arturo. Well, I listened to Arturo's side of the story, and I listened to everybody's story in town. And I told Arturo, I said, well, Arturo, these are the strategies in the ways that you need to address this. So Arturo addressed it that way. And the way that I knew Arturo is because, now imagine what Arturo is charged with. But the sheriff of this county had put Arturo out working the gardens and the landscapes at the county courthouse, and so Arturo was accessible. You could talk to him, and at the end of the night, Arturo went back into the jail and talked to him, and got his side of the story. Well, now when everything wasn't adding up, and this is not a question of guilt, but this is a question of proving beyond a reasonable doubt. Not the preponderance of evidence, but proving beyond a reasonable doubt. When it came to that, and when it came to the arguments that now Arturo was making on the public record, all of a sudden, the authorities felt that the case was in jeopardy. So what they did is they went to Arturo and they told him, Arturo, look, we're gonna take you off of your job. You know, you're not going to be able to work at the courthouse anymore. We're going to put you in solitary confinement, and we're going to give you a 99-year sentence. That's if you contest this, Arturo, that's what we're going to do to you. Now remember, this is being translated by someone who I'm not saying that he was involved with the state, but what I am saying to you is that he was not involved and he was not seeking Arturio's best interests. And the time which he would speak to Arturio was when Arturio was tired, he was sleepy, he was incoherent, he was scared. And so Arturio didn't see the thing through. He didn't see the legal strategies through. And Arturio went down for 45 years. Now, this is not about Arturio's guilt or innocence. This is about translators, and this is about the process. I'm telling you that Arturio did not have a competent translator. And I'm telling you that Arturio's attorney could not speak directly to Arturio. And I am telling you that whenever Arturio was talked to by the translator, the client privilege was nebulous. It was nebulous. He was always subject to being spoken to by the translator in a place where the authorities could record the entire conversation. Even though Arturio was on work release, they did not let Arturio speak to his attorney and to his lawyer in the privacy of the lawyer's office, where confidentiality and privilege would have been guaranteed. Now, that's my dog in the fight, is that I see it over and over and over again, where a Latino who speaks English and Spanish will abuse another Latino, where a Brasileiro who speaks Portuguese and English will sometimes abuse his own mother or own grandmother or own sister or own brother in the United States. They always will get the raw end of the deal. And you're saying, well, these are what you're thinking is that, you know, it's like bank robbery where the person who can speak both languages just goes in and just completely strips the other person down who can't speak, strips him down and take everything. No, it doesn't work that way. The way it works is that you just subtly nickel and dime that monolingual. You just subtly nickel and dime him, nickel and dime him, nickel and dime him. And then you always speak ill of him. You know, Mexicans are notorious for saying that monolingual Spanish speakers are dumb. And I see nothing dumb about them. They just only speak one language. Not dumb, very intelligent. And you speak to them in Spanish and you know, they're completely lucid, literate, and completely complete. I've met doctors and lawyers who have only spoken Spanish in the United States. And it obviously they made it through medical school, they made it through law school, so that has to tell you that they're not stupid as these other people are calling them. They just don't have that second language. Now, my dentist, he tries to speak to me in English. And he is not, at this point, a competent English speaker. He's not a competent Portuguese speaker. He's a competent Spanish speaker. But he's one hell of a good dentist. So what I'm saying here about Floyd Wallace Jr. is that we have to make sure that the process is correct. Presumption of innocence, that he has a lawyer that he can communicate with, and that he has the right of refusal of that counsel, that he has translation, that he has a translator, and that the translator, that he has a right of refusal for the translator. And we have to make sure that his defense is adequately funded. Not because of his innocence or his guilt, but as Robert Jackson said, and at the Robert Jackson Center, as Robert Jackson said in Nuremberg, and I'm going to paraphrase here, Robert Jackson knew that Nuremberg was a victor's more or less kangaroo court. He understood that. And he didn't fight against that. But what he did try to say is that we are going to have an absolutely open process. So that if there are any irregularities in this victor's trial, then in generations to come, we will be answerable in the transcript. And that's what we're talking about with Floyd Wallace Jr. Not his innocence, not his guilt, but we're talking about the process. That's what we're talking about with Arturo Lopez. Not Arturo Lopez's innocent or his guilt, but the process. And I guarantee you, once Mr. Lopez started making cogent arguments that his attorney did not make and that the translator did not make, the state rushed. They ran. They drove fast to plea bargain. They got there ASAP pronto, in un segundo. Now that is inexplicable. And it was all over the news. It was everywhere, just like this thing is all over the news and everywhere. It's all over the news. It was everywhere. And I mean, and political reputations were at stake. I mean, politicians in that area were running on getting Arturo Lopez and getting him 99 years. I mean, and they were certain they were going to get him 99 years. They got him half of that. But in my mind, they could have not given him any of that because there was no forensic evidence whatsoever. None. There was really no evidence of psychological trauma when it came to the quote-unquote little girl who was the victim. The only thing that was clear-cut is that the mother was a meth addict and she wanted money. Now, I'm going to say this and I'm going to repeat this again. I am not saying that Arturo Lopez was innocent. He pled guilty. That's not what I'm saying. And that's not what I said at the time to anyone. But what I did say to everyone is that we had better make sure that the process is not flawed. And in this case, we want to make sure that Mr. Wallace is afforded the best process possible. So if that means that you have to reach down deep and have a GoFundMe and make sure that he gets a good attorney and a good translator, if you call yourself a passport bro or whatever you're calling yourself, it's in your best interest to send $2 or $3 or $4 or $5. That's in your best interest. That's in your best interest, because you never do know when you might need an attorney. Now, what I say is that the minute you land on the tarmac, get an attorney. The second you land on the tarmac, get an attorney. Say it again. The second you land on any tarmac, get an attorney. That's something that you must have because of potentially frequent encounters with law enforcement. You don't want to, like, for example, traffic police stop me and they say, you did this, you did that. Okay, all correct. All correct. All which I was answerable to. And so they said, look, you can pay us now, or we can take your car and we can take you down to the court and you can resolve it there. That's what they said. Now, if they take the car and they resolve it there and they put me in custody, whose custody am I in? See, that's what you never think about in foreign countries. And I had the same thing happen in the Philippines. So I know exactly what I'm talking about. Whose custody are you in? In the United States, where you have habeas corpus, that's what habeas corpus does, is it tells you, and habeas corpus is where is the body, who holds the body. Well, just because someone flashes a badge and a gun and has a uniform on in other parts of the world, that doesn't tell you whose custody you're in. And you can't go and say, hey, under habeas corpus, who is holding me? You can't, call your brother and say, hey, go file a writ of habeas corpus and find out who's holding me. You see the problem? So what is simple in the United States now, which used to be complicated there also, what is simple in the United States gets far more complicated as soon as you cross a border. So you need a lawyer so that in case you are arrested for anything, the lawyer can come down, document that you are under arrest, say exactly where you are and what the process is. See, people just think that, hey, they think like you think in America. They think that it's all just cut and dry, that if I'm innocent, they got to let me go. They don't have to let you go in another country. In the Philippines, they don't have to let you go. Brazil, they don't have to let you go. Mexico, they don't have to let you go. They have an entirely different concept of habeas corpus. Do you think in Nazi Germany that they just let you go? You were innocent and you were proven to be innocent and they let you go? Do you think that right now in Putin's Russia that you are proven to be innocent, that they just let you go? No, doesn't work that way. Works that way in general in the United States, but it doesn't work that way everywhere. So the investment that you make in a GoFundMe for Floyd Wallace Jr. will pay you dividends, because what's going to occur is that you'll have established translators, and you'll have at least one established attorney that knows how to practice in that area, and that can be referred to others that get into similar trouble or get into any trouble, not similar trouble, any trouble. Right now, you don't know. I can find a good lawyer in Mexico, and I have one. I can find a good lawyer in the Philippines because I have one. I can find a good lawyer in Brazil because I have one. But that doesn't mean that you have one. See, Arturo Lopez did not have a good attorney. Arturo Lopez did not have a good translator. So in my mind, I don't know what happened. I just don't know what happened to this very day. I'd like to talk to Arturo Lopez one day and find out what he thought about it.